The lesson.
Oh, yeah.
Last question is, if you took Oz rap and you look at like in sports how they have a ladder. If you took Oz rap and took the cities and had to create like a top 5 ladder of who dominated Oz rap, say, in your time, from your era.
Yeah.
And then if you do the same for the current now.
Yeah.
So starting with the old school, I guess your era.
Yeah.
Who do you think, what city do you reckon had it, and then go down the line from number 1 to number 5?
Well, for me, it's easy Melbourne. Like for my generation, easily, man, easily. But then Adelaide had to have been a close second. Sydney third. I mean, I would put Brisbane at the arse end of that list, bro. I would put Brisbane down the bottom because Brisbane really wasn't recognised until like where the Lazy sort of started coming through. When Lazy sort of started coming through with banning Queensland, the Black Stump Tape and Brothers Stoney, they'd gotten some recognition. But, Brisbane would largely, even into my generation, because I kind of considered those guys just above me, but like even still, we would generally go between Brisbane and Melbourne constantly. Brisbane and Melbourne constantly. When we were dropping music and touring consistently, we were going to Adelaide here and there. Went to Adelaide probably half a dozen times, went to Perth once, went to Sydney 2-3 times, but we were in and out of Melbourne for a number of years constantly. So, for me, Melbourne was always there, from graffiti to rap music to, just to visiting a city, man. To me, it was like visiting New York, like the first time I went to Melbourne, man, felt like I was in New York City. It was just like, wow, and I only can make that reference now having visited New York City. It was just that it was like, man, it was like going to this fucking hub of culture. Like the streets were fucking bombed. Hip hop was alive, like it was crazy. And then, I would say Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, because Sydney birthed it, though Sydney, beyond Death Wish Cast, and man, I won't say Sydney wasn't an influence on what we were doing, but Sydney wasn't a heavy influence on us up here at that time. It just wasn't. And I remember even when we first did our first shows in Sydney, we were kind of like, man, is anyone even going to come? Like, do we even have a presence in Sydney? You got to think it's pre-internet, well, not pre-internet, but it's pre-social media and all that kind of thing, we're like, man, and then Sydney would roll out. Like, Sydney would roll out for any of our shows, any Lazy Grey shows or 750, man. We had some great shows. We had some incredible shows in Sydney. But then I would put Sydney, and I'd put Brisbane down the bottom, man. I mean, we forget Tassie, but I've never even been to Tassie. And then Perth. I mean, Perth, dude. Like, Perth were over there dominating with syllabolics. I mean, you had, and that's, I should probably put it Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, Sydney, Brisbane, like that's how I would go down the list. Northern Territory, man, shouts to anyone in the Northern Territory, but I'm entirely ignorant as to what's going on up there. I don't know, like I meet people from the NT, from like Darwin and shit like that. Incredible dudes, man. Everyone's like mad characters come out of Darwin, but I don't know what's going on up there hip hop wise. Never went there for hip hop. Went to Perth once, like no one wanted to fly 3-4 dudes from Brisbane to Perth, man. That was $600-700 flights, like it just wasn't viable for anyone, and for the numbers we draw, to get hopefully a couple of few hundred people to a gig, but yeah, I would put Perth probably third on that list because Perth was thriving with syllabolics, with, Downside, Matty B, fucking all that. I mean, every city thrived, everyone thrived. It's just where it's sat in my books. And today, I suppose it's kind of different. I mean, I think Sydney came to dominate over the past few years. Like, like we were talking about Cursor earlier, that title, that tsunami that Cursor was, like a lot came along with that, So there's a lot of people inspired by his movement that have, built a movement today, like, so I would put a Sydney probably up there. I see a lot of rappers coming out of Sydney. A lot of rappers coming out of Brisbane, man, out of the fucking western suburbs of Brisbane now. Heaps, man, heaps. Like, mad rappers and rappers with huge followings that I'm largely kind of ignorant to, that I'm largely unaware of, Like, they're not in my not in my sphere, like I'm not kind of, someone will say to me, have you heard such and such? And I'll be like, nah, and I'll check them out. I'll be like, man, dude's got like fucking 75,000 followers on social media, and fucking I check a video and a video's got fucking 150,000 views and it only dropped 2 weeks ago. You know, I'm just like, fuck, you know, like dudes are doing shit. In terms of today, man, yeah, I suppose Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, I mean, yeah, dude, it's all relative. For me, like what I came up in, it was definitely Melbourne. Melbourne held that pole position for most of us. You know, today, different story. But yeah, I couldn't tell you how today is. I know Brisbane's kicking goals though today. You know, like, you know, Brisbane's definitely up there today, where it was on the bottom of the list back then. You know, it was really only a handful of groups coming out of here, and we were largely ignored until, you know, the mid-2000s. You know, like people were aware of Lazy and Black Stump and the Resin Dogs, you know, and a handful of others, Decipher, you know, there might have been a few others, but yeah, you know, that's kind of how I view that one, man.
The lesson. 927. Oh yeah.